Hello, 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 everybody, and welcome to Flatiron School's Intro to HTML and CSS. I am Tiffany Webb. I am your host for this evening. I am currently the director of product marketing and events. It's been a very long week and day. And a big part of my job is to put on events like this for you, to help you get into, coding, or if any other discipline, if you're into data science or cybersecurity or product design, we also have events for that as well. But a lot of what we do is to host these free workshops so that you can get some hands-on experience with something that you may be interested in. I got a question in chat already. Yes, the video is off. You are unable to use your video and your mic, but you can communicate with us through the chat. I will be looking through that chat the entire time, as well as the Q&A function if you're a little bit more shy and you want to put questions in there. And I will pass those questions over to our awesome instructor, and he will, give you some answers. I just want to go over some quick housekeeping. First things first, everyone has questions. Don't forget to ask them, put them in the chat. But in order to do that, make sure that everyone can see your questions. So go to the chat function where it says to, go to the little blue bar and make sure that everyone can see what you're asking. It just makes things easier and streamlines everything. Secondly, this is a free workshop and we're all here to have a good time. So let's be kind to each other in the chat, please. And let's be kind to our instructor. He has given up some valuable time in this afternoon after a long day of teaching to teach you how to, code. So let's be kind to him, and please be kind to me. I am not tech savvy, so I am not ignoring your stuff in the chat. Sometimes I can answer, sometimes I can't, and I'm just waiting for a nice little break to kind of pass that information over to Greg. So let's just be kind and friendly and have a good time. With that being said, I am very excited to pass the baton over to our amazing instructor, Greg Dwyer, who will teach you the intro to HTML and CSS. Oh, I'm sorry. And we have Corey here. I forgot. Sorry, my bad, Corey. Corey is here. She is our new events coordinator, and she will be taking over some events in the near future. So she's just here to kind of watch the chat with me and kind of see how this goes. Anyway, back over to you, Greg. Oops, are you muted?
Oh, I was muted, but not anymore. Thanks, Tiffany. Kevin, love the positivity. Great to be here. I don't know if your last name is actually Kevin, but I hope it is. Kevin. Very cool. Let's dive right in to one. Thank you all for coming tonight. This is, how you're spending your time is in learning and bettering yourself and trying to expand your own skill set. So I think it's pretty cool that you're all here with me to discuss some web development. As far as this session goes, I want to talk about a few things right up front. One, myself, just so you get a little sense for who I am and what brings me here. And then two, a few of the bullet points that we're going to cover tonight. We have about an hour to get through a whole bunch of concepts and ideas. So hopefully we can get through as much as we can in that time. And then anything else that we don't get through, there's always more to learn. So we can come on back a different time or take to the internet to figure some stuff out. My name's Greg. I am an instructor here at Flatiron School. I've been so for about 3 years. Before that, I worked, in some early phase startups in San Diego. And we were building products, and primarily physical products. Some had applications attached to them, but we were developing these things, physical products, and developed in China or Australia, wherever our manufacturers were, and a lot of back and forth. And it's very exciting to be a part of products development. And the thing that I love most about programming is this idea that we can have some concept, some idea, and we can make a tangible product with just our mind and our time, right? A skill set of coding, our mind, and the time we're able to put into it. So for me, programming and coding is an extremely kind of magical process of dreaming something up. And then with nothing other than my time and my skill and my ability, we can make that into a tangible product that people are then using on the internet, potentially across the world, which is a crazy, crazy concept. So Hopefully we're all going to get our toe a little bit wet with that. We're going to think of an idea tonight, or we're going to conceptualize an outcome, and then we're going to build towards that and see how far we get into it. Awesome. I'm going to share my screen. Hopefully you all can see it in 3, 2, 1.
Looks good.
Sweet. Let me just get the chat open in case there's any questions that pop up. I'll try to keep an eye on as well. Tiffany will let me know if I miss anything, but please feel free to have any questions or want me to slow down or speed up even, type it into the chat and we can talk about those things hopefully and dedicate a little time to just addressing what comes up. This workshop is definitely about me sharing information, but it's about you all receiving that information the best you can. So if you have any questions, let's talk about those things. I'm sure other people have those questions as well. Alrighty. My first question. Who here has written a line of code? Just type in yes or no into the chat.
It's awesome. A nice mix of both.
Nice. Yeah. Taught myself HTML way back in the day, early 2000s. It's basically the same thing. Some things have been added, obviously, and progressed. A lot of yeses and some nos. Excellent. Who here has built out a full website before? More no's probably. Yes, and some yeses. All right. So this is definitely an intro to web development here. And we're going to talk about the languages that make up pretty much every single web page that we go to. But it's definitely an intro level. So some of this might be review for many of you. You know, maybe you did this a long time ago, you're getting back into it, or maybe it's fresh in your mind. So it could be review for you. I want you to understand that. For those of you who are saying like, no, I've never built a site, I've never written a line of code, there will be a lot of new information and that can be intimidating. So try to bear with us and ask questions where you have them, and I'll try to slow down and get into those things as best we can. We do have a kind of diverse room here of people who have interacted with the web, which is cool. Alrighty, let's go. The first thing I want to introduce is an environment in which we can write code. And for this session, you all can choose to code along with me and try to implement what we're talking about, or you can just be a little bit more passive and watch and try to understand what we're talking about as we talk about it. A lot of times we download these applications like VS Code or Atom or Sublime Text, and these are IDEs that we have on our computer where we write code. We're going to use one that is actually web-based. So we don't need to download anything. We're just going to go to the web and we should be able to write code in what we call an IDE or just a kind of coding environment. The one that we're going to use today is called Repl. This is going to simulate a real, it's Repl.it, Repl.it. And I can send out this link in the chat in just a second here. I'm going to log out so I go through the process with everybody. Log out.
I can put that in the chat.
You got it? Sweet. Tiffany's going to add that link. But if you just go to Google, you type in Repl, you should get to something like this. And right here, we're going to be creating an environment where we can code on our own computers. I'm just going to type in, well, Fern, this website requires you to log in or sign up. We should be able to do so with Google. So for me, I'm just going to log in with my GitHub, but you can do it with Google as well and create an account. It's free. Once you have logged in, you should come to a page like this. And I'm going to just say, create a new REPL. We're going to talk about what we're going to build in a second. Right now, we're just getting set up on the environment, but we will come back a few steps and talk about what we're going to build. Once you create a new REPL, I would search for like HTML maybe, but we want to use this template, which has HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And you can name yours anything. I'm going to call mine Intro to Web Development. And I'm going to create this new REPL. Should not be a blank screen, so let's give it a second. Maybe I'll refresh the page. Yes, if you already have VS Code or something of that sort installed, feel free. It's going to be the same process. Awesome. All right, once you've created your account and you said create a new REPL, we get brought to this. This is going to be our development environment today. And this is a web platform, REPL, but it really emulates what you will see in any code editor that we choose to use. And what we see here the question is no Python tonight, just HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. I was actually going to ask this earlier, like what if you were to tell me what languages make up the web, what would you say? I've kind of given that away at this point. Now we've started with index, JavaScript, and CSS. Python is a really cool language, but JavaScript is the only language that is executed in our browsers. It's the only scripting language that is actually run real time by Chrome or Safari, our browsers or our clients. So even websites that use Python as maybe a backend are still more often than not running some level of JavaScript in the browser. So yes, today's going to primarily focus on HTML and CSS, and then if we have some time, we will get into JavaScript. And absolutely, this is more of a web-based exercise rather than a backend. We're not going to be building any databases or servers or anything like that today, which we would use Python for. Ruby, Flatiron School uses Ruby for our backends. Python's another good language though, for sure. All right. So this is going to be our coding environment. Hopefully, if you're coding along, you've gotten to this place where we've set up an account and we've opened up our new REPL. If not, and you have any questions, feel free to ask them. But otherwise, I'm just going to move forward. So we have 3 languages that essentially build up the entire internet. There's many other languages and libraries, but 3 core languages that are essentially in every single website that we go to. And if you hadn't guessed yet, they're going to be our index, they're going to be HTML, JavaScript, and CSS. In your own words, what would you say in the, our HTML file is for? Anybody? Just type it out. Content, the information on the page, hierarchy of text. All of these things are accurate. Hypertext markup language, that's what it stands for. Appearance, a little bit. Appearance is definitely a piece of it, but when we think about the visual aspect of a website, we're definitely going to think more of CSS, our cascading style sheets. It has that word style right inside of it. So this CSS will definitely become more of the appearance side of it. When I think about CSS, it is not just about appearance, but it's actually about usability and like the user experience. We're talking about like UX and other things outside of just looking beautiful, right? Skeleton for HTML, awesome. So the index HTML, this HTML file is, we can think of it a lot like we would any kind of outline that we do for like studying for a test in college, right? We write headers and we write bullet points. Maybe we add a little image in there. As a reminder, that is really our HTML. It's our backbone of content. It's also going to be the hub of information for our page. So this is our HTML. And this is the file that's going to be served up to our browser. And this is going to be the center of our application. This HTML is going to pull in styles to make it look pretty. And it's going to pull in JavaScript. What's JavaScript's job? Dynamic, that's a good word for JavaScript. Yeah, JavaScript's a little bit tougher. JavaScript can manipulate styles. Functionality, I think that's the perfect kind of single word descriptor for JavaScript, right? Whenever there's that interaction with a user and a web page, whenever we have functionality, we are typically having some JavaScript run to compute some outcome and then relay that response to the user. Interactivity, functionality, those are kind of buzzwords that come to mind when we think about JavaScript. JavaScript is how we add that interactivity and that functionality to a page. So when you drag and drop something, right? That dragging usually has some JavaScript in there, computing where that thing is on the page, or many other things that we are doing is JavaScript. The power of JavaScript is that it's one of the only languages, like I was mentioning, one of the only scripting languages that is actually executed in the browser. So we don't need to make another request across the internet to run JavaScript and send a response. It actually runs in our browser. So once we get JavaScript to our browser, it's actually executing right there on our own web page, which is pretty cool. A lot of power in that. Gives the web page life. Yes, I love that. So HTML is our hub though. So you'll see this template already set us up with a few things. This is boilerplate HTML. Every single HTML document starts with this boilerplate HTML. Let's break this down for a quick second here. Everything in the head, everything inside this head tag ends down here. Everything inside of there is essentially metadata for metadata for the browser. This is all stuff that our browser, Chrome, Safari, Firefox, is reading from this HTML. Everything inside of the body, this body tag that starts here and closes here, are things that we're going to see on the web page. So if I run this, we're going to see hello world right here on our web page. Hello world. If we type some other stuff in here, some gibberish, and we run it, we'll see that on our web page. So if we look at our development environment here, we have our files in HTML, JS, CSS. This is just like any other code environment. We have the area here where we're going to actually write code, JavaScript, CSS, or HTML. And then we have the output of that. This is going to be like our browser. This is Chrome or Safari or Firefox or something of that sort happening right over here. Down here, we have a console, which we can kind of tap into some of the areas of our computer or our program through this development console. We won't spend too much time in here today, but getting comfortable with the console when you're developing is a crucial, definitely early step of getting into programming. Cool. So I keep calling HTML kind of the hub, and there's two more things I want to point out. Here's our HTML. In here, in between the body tags, this is everything that we're going to see, not necessarily the script. This is everything that we're going to see on our web page. So all of our HTML that we want to see on the page is going to be in between these body tags. But I keep calling this the hub because it also links in our style CSS right here, and it links in our JavaScript. So this one page of HTML is connecting in our CSS and it's pulling in our JavaScript to affect this content. And we'll get more into that as we build into CSS and JavaScript. But it's a good thing to identify early on. Cool. I'm going to put one last file here. This is not an important one for you all to put. It's just for, this is Markdown. MD stands for Markdown language. And basically, this is how we can write notes and have it show up like an outline. And this is going to be our goal for today. So I just wanted to just kind of be here and live here. If you come back to this and you're like, what did we learn that day with Greg? You'll be able to look at this and see kind of what our topics were.
Hey, Greg, there is a question in the Q&A from Karen. Are
Yeah.
HTML and CSS compliers, interpreters, or both? And how does that affect the performance or response?
Cool. It's actually, the browser itself with these languages is what's going to be compiling, or really not compiling, but interpreting what is shown in the browser here. So these aren't compiled languages. JavaScript is an interpreted language, and these are all being executed in the browser. So they're being interpreted real time in the browser. The HTML and CSS are extremely fast because they're not really doing, there's no logic, there's no scripting. If we write, we'll get into it in a minute, but if we write HTML, right? If I say, here's a header, and we type something, hello, there's no computing of this that needs to like look at variables and to figure out what values are. We write this text and this text shows up on the page. So there's no real like computing of logic when it comes to HTML and CSS. JavaScript is a different story. And there when we get into JavaScript, there is a concern of like efficiency, right? The code, the logic that we write, is it efficient when our code is running? The purpose of the metadata up here is really telling our browser. I see two questions. I'll answer both of them. The purpose of the metadata is really telling our browser what to expect with this HTML file. So we're telling it what type of character set we're using. We're telling it some stuff about the viewport and the width and the size of the viewport. And then this title here is actually, it's going to change. Like you see how we have tabs up here, Intro to Web Development. When you change this title, new title, the browser will change what it has in the tab. So when you load into this page, the browser will actually say new title now as our like tab there for it. But this is all pretty much information. When we say metadata, it's information for the browser to help it recognize what it's reading. And then the other question is, why is this script tag down here? The truth is, this script tag can also be up here in the header. But the reason it's down here right now is because JavaScript should not execute. Well, the point of our JavaScript when we get there is to target things in our HTML and then manipulate them or make changes to them, right? And if our body, this runs top to bottom. So if the body of our HTML doesn't exist yet, we don't want our JavaScript to run. So if we write all of our HTML above this script tag, then we can be confident that hello world exists before we start running scripts that change this HTML. So sometimes you'll see it down here. Sometimes you'll see it up in the head and you'll see a word called defer. And what this means is do not run this JavaScript until the entire page has loaded. Cool. All right. What we're going to go over today. We set up our REPL environment. We're going to talk about the 3 core languages of the web. HTML, we've already kind of started on this journey. CSS, which is a really fun place to get our feet wet and to mess around with some styling. And then JavaScript. JavaScript is going to be last, and if we have some time, we'll get into it, but we're going to primarily focus on some HTML and some CSS to start. And that is extremely powerful. Who has a website that they go to that I can go visit right now? Something PG that we can all look at. Who has a good site that they enjoy? Nike.com. Perfect. All right, here's Nike.com. It's loading in. This is a modern day site. As we scroll through this, it looks enjoyable to our eye. We can understand the categories that we're gonna go to. We can see some sort of advertisement on different brand drops that they're doing, shoes. We can navigate this site intuitively because we've been users of the web for 20 years. If I take away, this is just a little plug-in here. If I disable all these styles, all I did is disable styles. This is the site. This is the site without styles. This is the same information that we were just seeing on the page. Here's a banner image. Here's some headers, the best of Air Max. Here's that other banner that we saw. The shoes. This is the exact same page without CSS. Not very appealing. I would never build this site and send somebody there here in the year 2021, right? They would have such a headache trying to navigate this website, even though it's got all the same information. It has all the same ability to buy sneakers and to do fun things with. This is just HTML. And this is what we're going to start with. We're going to build content that looks like this. And then we're going to try to layer on CSS. And we may not get to Nike's level, but we'll try to layer on CSS so it can look something like this. And this page hasn't changed actually at all.
Sorry, Greg, were you able to show them what Chrome extension
Absolutely.
was that?
Yeah, so these are Chrome extensions. You can download them in the Chrome store. And this one conveniently is just named Web Developer. It has a whole bunch of tools you can tap into. But this one here, when I went to CSS, you can just disable like style sheets. So yes, this is a Chrome extension I'm using to disable those style sheets, just as a demo. Cool. All right. So hopefully you can wrap our head around just the idea like, okay, we're going to build this backbone in HTML. Not very exciting, still very important. That's all the content. Then we're going to layer on some CSS and it's going to jump up and hopefully look like a modern day site that we would go to. If we look at, let's look at really quickly our end goal. So we're going to build something along the lines, roughly. This is just a mock-up that I made. We can add some character to it if we want. But we're going to have some sort of banner up top. We're going to have some sort of nav bar that we can navigate from page to page. We'll have some content that maybe we'll center, maybe a button if we get some JavaScript. And then we'll have some other maybe content down below that we can kind of format in a tiled view. The question, will we be given today a copy of today's recorded class? I believe absolutely.
Yes, you will get a recording of this within 48 business hours. So be on the lookout next week.
Right on. All right, we've spent enough time, I think, talking about what we're gonna do. Now it's just time to start doing, right? So far, inside of our development environment, we've done nothing. If you're doing this along with me, we've written no code. The body of this can be completely empty. All the code that we're going to write is going to be in the body, hanging out right here. And let's start with a couple HTML tags. We have a handful. There's not this exhaustive list of common HTML tags. There's only a handful of really common HTML tags. We have headers. So we have something like a H1. And we can say, like, maybe we'll say, welcome to fall 2021. And anytime you want to see what you've written here over in our browser, we can hit run. Cool, welcome to fall 2021. What other tags do we have for HTML? If you want to put a couple in the chat. What are common tags in HTML? A tag, perfect, actually, that's a great example. BR, P tags, EM, div's super common. Div.
I love
Header.
how much you all know about the
yeah,
types
these are
of tags.
all
This is
these
amazing.
are great ones. I want to find one that is, that's all right. Image, I think, is a good one. I'm not sure if you all have it in there. Section, header, cool. We have an image tag. I want to have that one for a specific reason. And I saw one, somebody said UL, a UL tag. A lot of these, so H1 is a header tag, and we can do headers, and HTML has some default styling, right? This text just got bigger and bolder. H1s can go all the way down to H6. H1, H2, H3, H4, H5, all the way down to H6, and our header gets smaller and this is still bold, right? So we have this header tag. Change this back to H1, make it nice and big. UL is a really common tag. It stands for unordered list. There's also an OL for ordered list, but we have unordered list. So we can then do inside here, list items. So LI tag. And if we do like item 1, maybe we'll say like home, and we'll say about us, and maybe like Nike, if we want to link out to Nike. And we run this. We now have 3 list items. We put them inside of a UL, and then we had 3 LIs inside of there. And we start to see our outline kind of come to life, that outline of when we are studying for a test, right? Our link tag, we have some link. Maybe we can actually do this one to Nike. So Nike.com, and we'll say link to Nike. So links are pretty cool. We can link internally around our application, or we can link externally. So this will actually link over to like Nike.com. Here's a good question. How do we know which tags to type in? We will get comfortable with a handful of really common tags, and you'll start to use them all the time. But it's a good question. How do I know what to type in? Especially when we get to CSS, we'll talk about this a little bit, but the internet is our friend. So when I'm starting to write HTML, as long as I can formulate the question, I ask the internet. So as long as I know, okay, I need a header. Header in HTML, right? W3 Schools is a great resource for HTML. And it gives you examples built right in. H1 right here. W3 Schools is an excellent resource. Yes. So it's really about saying, okay, I've been a user of the internet for many years. I know I need this. I know I need to X, right? How do I ask Google that? And then really Googling it, I mean, you'll see memes around the internet, but Google is a giant piece of being a developer, new or veteran developer. A div tag is really important. This is really kind of like a container tag. Div tags have no value on their own. They're meant to kind of section off our page. So we're just kind of creating containers for our page. So if we think about this idea here, let's start to section this off. I'm going to say that this banner is going to be one section. I'm going to say that this nav bar is going to be another section. I'm going to say that this body right here will be another section. And we're going to start to section off our page. So if we go to, here's our header, right? This is going to be our header banner. Let's give this a section. We're going to put it in between these div tags, and this will be a section. Let's create another section. And this is going to be our nav bar. And we need a bunch of links in there, right? We want to link to different pages. So we'll say a tag and we'll say home. And for now, it's going to link nowhere. We can change that in a little bit. We'll say about, and we'll keep our Nike reference here from the suggestion earlier. What I want to point out is that a majority of HTML tags have what we call an opening and a closing tag. So opening tag, content goes in the middle, closing tag. That's a majority of our tags, opening and closing. Some tags, like an image tag, are self-closing. We don't need a closing image tag. The content is actually going to be part of this source. So there are a few different pieces of any HTML tag that we want to identify. One is the opening tag and the closing tag. Two is the content in between tags. And three are any attributes inside of the opening tag. So this is the opening tag for an A tag, right? And here's the closing. Here's the content in between. This is inside of the opening tag here. We have our A tag and we have href right inside of it. This is called an attribute of an HTML tag. So three pieces, the tag itself, A tag, the content in between the tags, home, this is the text on the page that we're going to see, and then attributes inside of each tag. And we'll talk about attributes a little bit as we get deeper into it. If I place my nav bar on a header tag before the body, is that a good practice, or you recommend another way? We shouldn't have anything before the body. It should be inside of the body. But if you want your nav bar on the very top, absolutely. This is our nav bar. Absolutely. So let's say we want to make an adjustment. This will display in order. So if we want our nav bar above our home banner, we can move this to the top. And this will rearrange our order. Now we have our nav bar. This is going to be our banner. And this is a separate UL that we were messing around with. So yes, you can mess around with the order of these things for sure. Let's create one more section. For now, let's call this div, and we'll call this we'll say this is like a main content goes here. We'll just put a P tag is a really common tag. It stands for paragraph tag, and is what we'll write most of our like generic text as in P tags. Most of the generic text that we have will just be like a paragraph tag. So we will say main content of site goes here. Cool. Maybe I'll put like a little H3 in here, another header. It says like main content. And underneath, I want to create a button. So I can go and ask Google, how do I create a button in HTML? We know buttons exist. And you can actually find out that we just have a button tag conveniently. We have a button tag, and we can say, click me. Cool. Run this, and we see that we have our nav bar. We have our header. We have our main content section. So I've put a div here for our nav bar. We have a div here for our header, and we have a div here for our main content section.
We have a couple of questions.
Absolutely.
Does
Good
the
time to stop.
distance matter in HTML like in Python?
Good question. No, white space in Python matters. It does not matter in HTML, CSS, or JavaScript.
Awesome. And then Alex wrote, might have missed this, but did you already include HTML to make the navbar links display horizontally?
Oh, that's a great question. It's a little bit of a deeper understanding type questions. Like, why did all of these display like on top of each other? Our header, this main content didn't show up to the right of the header, right? I mentioned that all HTML, right, has some default styles built into it. Every browser that interprets HTML puts its own variation of default styles on it. So most elements, divs, buttons, p tags, headers, ULs, ls, most HTML elements are something that we call block level elements, which means that they take up the entire width of the parent page or the page. They take up the entire width of whatever container they're in, which is the page. Some HTML elements are what we call inline elements or inline block, which A tags are inline elements, which they only take up the width of the content. So let's do something real quick. I'm going to go to my style sheet, and I'm going to add, this is a global style when you use the star operator, and I'm going to add a border to everything. This might be hectic, but let's see. 1px, 1 pixel, solid black. All right, and we're going to run this. And we just put a border around everything. And what you're going to see is, even though welcome to fall stops right here, the border of this H1 goes all the way to the end. So nothing can slip up next to it. Nothing can squeeze up next to it, because the header is actually what we call block level element, which takes up the entire width of the page. This p tag, although it ends right here, is a block level element. So it takes up the entire width of the page. This a tag is an inline block or inline level element. And you'll see that the border actually ends right here. And it only takes up the width of its content, which means that there's space to stack next to it, which is why it happened vertically. Can we center this text? Yeah, we're going to get into all that kind of stuff in a moment with some CSS. But that was a great question. Again, it takes a little bit of a deeper understanding of what's happening in the browser, but there are different level. Majority of elements that you encounter will be block level, and they'll take up the entire width of the page, which means that nothing can squeeze up next to them. Some elements, like the A tag and like a span, are inline level elements. So they take up the width of their content, which means that things can squeeze up right next to them and they end up being horizontal. We'll center some text here in a moment. Cool. Let's get rid of this one style here. Here, let's start styling. I think I want to get to some of that before we run out too low on time. So you can use div to also divide into columns too, right? Yeah, these divs are really just containers, and then we can add styles on them to kind of place them in different places on the page, make them into 2 columns. Something that is worth Googling if you want to like create columns is CSS grid. And a complete guide, CSS Tricks is an incredible resource here. But CSS Grid says, okay, how can we essentially break the page up into separate sections? And what you're gonna do when you go through CSS Grid, it will create multiple divs and then place them kind of next to each other. So you can create columns. But ultimately, that's what it's doing. It's using another really cool thing. If you're like, man, I don't fully understand CSS Grid yet. If you use a CSS Grid generators, these are really cool. I can actually, we're getting a little bit off track, but you can create, let's picture this whole box as our web page. I can say, okay, I want this to be a box, I want this to be a div, and I want this to be a div. And this generator, now I say, hey, please may I have some code? And the generator will give me the HTML that I need, which is 3 divs. That's all it is. It's just 3 divs. And it will say, show me the CSS. If I put this CSS attached to those 3 divs, they'll be laid out like this, and we can put content inside of there. So this CSS, this isn't the only CSS Grid generator, but it's a really cool tool to help you get layout happening on your page without having to do too much work. At some point, it's nice to dive into like how that's working, but it's a great place to get started messing around with things. Cool. We'll comment out our I think that was all the questions that I saw. If there's more, repeat yourself and I'll see it. We got a little bit of a start here, and our page is not looking super exciting. It's looking a bit like you know, a slimmed down version of Nike without styles. It's just looking like text and links, right? So let's do a little bit of work on our CSS now to target HTML to make some of these changes. And I'm just going to start at the top of the page. This does not look like a nav bar to me yet. It's close, but not quite, right? So there are 3 ways that we target HTML. The whole goal of CSS is to target things on this page and style them differently, right? So we need a way for CSS to look at HTML, grab things off the page and make them look different. And there are 3 ways that we do that. We do that by tag name. We do that by ID name. And we do that by class name. These are the ways that we can select HTML elements. Tag name is the most straightforward, right? If I look at this HTML, I can see a tag of div, and I can target that div just by saying div. Now we open up our curly brackets, our block here for our CSS, and we have 2 pieces inside of here. We have an attribute. So let's say like I want to style the background color. As you start typing something in, it gives you all these suggestions: background image, background color, and it's really good to look through these really quickly. I'm looking for background color, and we can say like red, pink, and let's run that. Cool. So this div found every div on the page, which could be good, but it might be not so good, right? It might not be what we intended. So the first thing is tag, and it's really, that one's pretty straightforward. We just target the tag, we style it. The next one is ID. We haven't talked about IDs yet, but we did talk about attributes of an HTML element. Let's actually switch real quick. Let's switch class name and ID. So in our HTML, we can add attributes to any HTML element. And one of them is class. I can add a class. To any HTML element, I can add a class. And we use classes to help our CSS target specific pieces of the page. So let's say I just want my banner, or sorry, I just want my nav bar and my main content to be gray, right? I just want my nav bar and my main content to be gray. I can go into my HTML and I can give my nav bar a class of anything. The class can be literally anything we want to call it. Let's call this color, background color. Doesn't matter what we call this, but we're going to give our main body the same class, background color. So in my CSS, now I can target just the 2 divs that have background color, or that we want to have background color. So instead of saying just div, which gets all the divs on the page, we can say target the class. And the way we target a class is by using a period and then the class name. So background color. Then we open up our curly brackets block, and now I can say background color is pink. Let me run it. Oop. Something went wrong here. Let's go check this out. No D in the first spelling. Index HTML, background color. Cool. Spelling, little spelling slip up. Thank you, Catherine. So when we use class names, we want to target multiple things. We can put a class name on multiple things. The difference between a class name and an ID is that IDs should be specific to one thing. Only one thing in our entire HTML should have an ID. An ID should not be duplicated. So this is an attribute now we're putting on our header, and I'm just going to give it an ID of maybe like banner. And if we go into our CSS, the way that we target by ID is with a £. So I'll say £, octothorpe, hashtag, whatever you want to call it. And we'll say banner. That's what we called it in our HTML. We're targeting a piece of our HTML by the ID that we gave it. And then in here, we're saying, cool, give it some sort of style. I'm going to stick with background color for a second. We'll get more diverse in a moment. And we'll color this one purple. Cool. So these are the 3 ways that we target any HTML: by the tag name itself, by a class name using a dot operator, or by an ID using a hashtag. With those 3 things, we can do a lot of manipulation to our HTML. More times than, so the question here is, what's the difference between 2 quotes and a single quote and double quote? More often than not, nothing. You can use them interchangeably. I would encourage you to be consistent and not do what I did of using double quotes here and single quotes here. Consistency is probably the biggest rule of thumb there, just in terms of code smell, not functionality. Cool. All right, this still is not looking great though. So let's get this nav bar. Let's get this nav bar up and running. Let's make it look how we want it to look. I don't like that these look like links. It's a nav bar. We know they're links. I also don't like, how skinny it is and how cramped this space is. So we're going to try to space this out a little bit and make it look like a nav bar. So we need to target this div here. And I don't care about this background color of pink. So let's go give this a class of maybe an ID of nav. Cool. And in my CSS, we can now target instead of, I'm just gonna comment this stuff out. This is just as a demo of what we can target by. Let's go down here and we can target this nav bar by its ID of nav. And there's a couple things we want to do. I do want to give it a background color. I want to give it the kind of like a bar. So if we look at our example that we're building towards, this one has the blue bar. It doesn't really matter, but we want it to be like that kind of bar look. So we'll give it a background color. And we can go with, you know, it's fall, so maybe red. What's a good fall color? Orange, red, that seems appropriate. And we get this orangey red. This is a good question from that's in the chat. What about the nav tag? Why didn't we use a tag that actually exists that's called nav? And my short answer is we should use that. In recent iterations of HTML, they've come out with these more semantic tags, these tags that explain what a thing should be to the developer. So I can look at this. What you're going to see in a lot of code is what we call like div hell, where you have a million divs on the page. You have divs within inside of divs, and these divs don't really explain what this block of code is. It's just a div. It's just a generic container. So in recent iterations of HTML, they have these semantic tags, which are essentially the same thing as this div, but now I can say, nav, and give this block of code some context. So I encourage you to look at semantic tags and to use them. I didn't want to introduce too many tags all over the place. A lot of the semantic tags are just giving like a div some meaning. Semantic tags are great for a few reasons. One would be SEO and kind of like web crawlers, and two is screen readers, so accessibility on the screen, and also, and not least, is communication to other developers about what you're actually building your HTML to look at. So yeah, like section is, we could have maybe made this div something called main. And then maybe we have a few different sections inside of here. So what we're getting into now is we're just renaming. There's a little bit more to it, but not a ton. We're just kind of renaming div tags into these semantic tags that kind of explain what these pieces of our code are doing. Maybe this one would be, there's actually one called header. Not to be confused with head. This is a different tag. Header is something that we would put into the body here. So I'm not going to go too far into semantic tags. I want to move into some CSS, but I do encourage you, if you're writing CSS, instead of, when you start to write divs everywhere, start to think, what is the semantic version of this? What can I Google semantic HTML tags and say, like, what can I replace this div with? Does it make more sense as like a header tag? I'm going to put these back to divs for now, but it was a good question. It brought up a good topic. Cool. Cool. All right. So we got our nav bar. It's starting to come along. It has a background color. We also want to, I want to change these links. And how would I target these links? How would I target these links to change them? That's the first step. What would I do to target these links in my CSS? If I was to want to target these links and select them. Tag name or class name, right? So if we have the A tag, right now, they don't have a class name. So if we go by the A tag, we can say, text decoration. I want to get rid of that underline. I don't want it to look like a link. So I'm going to say text decoration, and I'm going to say none. Again, this is a great thing to Google. What I need to say is, in my mind, I want to get rid of this underline. How do I remove an underline from an A tag in HTML? And you Google that, and it'll say text decoration none. And it's great. It gets rid of that underline. If I end up having another link down here, all of a sudden this link now doesn't have an underline though, and I'm like, oh, that doesn't look like a link to me. So I want to be more specific. And one way that we saw was to add classes here. Another way is to go to the parent container and then say only grab A tags that are inside of a nav div. Yeah, exactly. Anthony was leading me forward on that one. But we can say like, okay, this is our nav, and we can say only grab A tags that are inside of nav. So we'll see that this A tag now has its text decoration back, but these ones do not have that underline. So you can kind of stack some of these selectors to be more specific. All right, let's try to get a little bit further through here. So we got our nav here. What I want is to maybe put a border around some of these. We'll say border 1px solid black for now. Let's see what happens. We get this little border and it's really cramped. So I'm gonna make this nav bar a little bit higher. So I'm gonna say height 40 pixels. Let's make this a little bit bigger. Nice. But now my text is not centered at all. So I need these A links to be more centered. So let's try saying, well, one way, who knows how we can space items out on a page? What do we use for spacing? There's two things. Margin is perfect, and padding. Margin is going to put space between two items. So it's going to fill up this right here, in between two items. Padding puts space between the content and its border. So if we add maybe like padding, and we add 20 pixels of padding, let's see what happens. What we see, hopefully, is that the space between home and the border has all this space now. Margin, let's make this a little bit smaller. Let's say 10. Let's be a little bit reasonable. Margin spaces things, spaces elements out between elements. So padding spaces between the content and its border. Margin is going to space out between two elements. So if I say margin, and let's say margin, top and bottom, let's do 0 pixels. And left and right, let's do 5 pixels. So the first number is top and bottom. The second number is left and right. If you write one number, it's all around the element. Yeah, a really great way to, let's see if we can visualize this real quick. I'm gonna pull this way over here, but let's run this. And we put some margins, so you see that space between these two elements pop up. If we open up our Chrome tools, if we just right click and you say inspect, we can then click on any piece of the page here. And we can see down inside of our styles here that you can actually highlight these different pieces of this element. So I go to padding, it shows me where that padding is. It's the green. Look at this Nike. It's the green. Or if I check the border, it shows me how much space that border is taking up. Or if I check the margin, it shows me around the outside. We just put margin on the left and right, but not the top and bottom. So a great way to check some of this stuff out is if you right click, inspect, and then you hit on this arrow and you come and click on an element, click this arrow, I'm gonna click on an element, and we can, down here in our styles, we can look, margin, okay, that's the margin. Padding, nice, it's inside of that container there. Let's see if we can sort this out a little bit. Let's say run 40 pixels. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get rid of these padding and margin just for a second. We'll bring them back. There's a couple ways that we can orient text. One of them is line height. And I want the line height to match the height of its container. And if we say 40 pixels, let's see what we got here. Sweet. So you'll see that this has lowered this into the center of this div. And now I want these buttons to be a little bit bigger. So let's bring back this margin and padding. And we started to fill up this container here. So line height, we matched it to the container. The line height of an individual A tag, we matched it to the container and it put it right down there in the middle. And I might get rid of this board. I don't like the board as much. It looks like a jack-o'-lantern, which is fine. We're starting to see that banner come to life. These are still purple. I don't love that. Let's make these color black for now. Maybe yellow. All right, that's bright. That's Halloween-y.
Someone asked, what is line dash height? Is it inherit?
This one is not inheriting anything currently. Like I could make it is in respect to the parent element actually. Yes. So like when we look at the line height, we're looking at it in relativity to the parent element of this nav bar. We're going to look at this one more time. We're going to do one more example of this. Let's do our banner. Let's do our banner right here. This is our header. If we take index.html, this is our banner. Right now, it's just a header. I want to go put an image behind it. So how do we add images in CSS? We can ask Google, but I'm going to say, let's grab our banner. And we're going to say background. If we look through here, we can see image. And I'm going to add an URL. So if we go to, I don't know, fall photos, fall images, color. Nope, not coloring pages. Just fall images is fine. I'm just going to grab an image from the web. So images, aspect ratio matters a little bit. So I'm just going to try to grab one that has a size of like big, large. It's not going to be perfect, but that's all right. And we will grab this nice fall photo. I don't need to be too picky, but I'm gonna be. All right, this one was fine. And if I just copy the image address right here, right click, copy image address, I can bring that right into our project. And if we run this, we can see that we have this background image on Welcome to Fall. The reason that it's so small is because divs do not have a height or a width of their own. The div only takes up as much space as the header does. So we need to give this div a little bit more space. Let's say, this is really long URL, which was a little shorter. But let's say height, and let's give it like 300 pixels. 300 pixels. And if we run that, now we have this larger container here. Let's see if we can get one that has more color just hitting us in the face here. Let's do maybe this one. Copy image address. And let's pull this guy here. Cool. All right, those are some good colors. It's not quite there. We can move this background image around. So if we say background image, background position, and maybe try center. Let's see what happens. Yeah, moves around a little bit. We can resize this a bit, but right now I just want that pop of color. What we're gonna do is I want this fall to be centered. So how can I center fall to be vertically centered?
Anthony said line dash height.
Line height. We're going back to our line height. Line height, and we're going to set it equal to the same line height as this container is. Thanks, Anthony. And we'll say 250 px. Run it. Perfect. It's right there in the center. Now we can also center this horizontally. So we can say text align center, which is more intuitive. And now it's in the middle of our page. Not very readable, but it's in the middle of our page. And we can also give this maybe a text shadow. Let's leave it there for a second. We can do font size. And we'll say maybe like 60 pixels. And run it. And that's huge. That's maybe way too big. Let's try 20. Let's try 40. Cool. Pixels are a bit of a static measurement, which is fine. But sometimes it's nice to measure this in something different. So we could do like 2, I think view width. Here, that's a little bit small. Let's say 4. And what this should do is every time we shrink this or grow this, it will actually base the size of this height based on the width of the page. So it's a little bit more dynamic. And since most people are viewing things on mobile, it's nice to think about mobile-friendly design. So something, pixels are fairly static, which is fine. But sometimes it's nice to think about other measurements that add more dynamic features to your page so you can see them on different viewports. Yeah, that's a good one. Another thing that we can use is like percentages. So like for this banner, maybe we want this banner instead of the width to be, instead of the width, which is currently the entire width of the page, we can also put it at like 80% of the page, right? So this is now gonna say, cool, no matter how big this page is, the banner is gonna be 80% of it. So percentages is another nice thing to do for things that are dynamic. Now it's all the way to the left though. So I'll do 85%. And I also need to now center this. So I wanna put the same amount of margin on this side as I do on this side. So I wanna put margin around both sides of this banner. And we can say margin. On the top and bottom, we're gonna do 0. And on the left and right, I'll do auto, which is just telling it to balance the margin on both sides. So we can now center this right in the middle of the page. We can do a similar thing with our nav bar if we want to match our banner size. We can say width, don't do 100% of the page, do 85% of the page. Margin, let's go with 0 pixels and auto. And I broke something. Let's try just copying and pasting so I don't break things. We'll come back to it. I might just have a conflicting margin up here. Oh, this is just for an A tag. Sorry. I want that to be inside of the nav container, 85%. And there we go. See you, Lori. Thanks for coming. All right. I know we're coming up on that full hour, maybe just a little bit over. So let's just do one more, maybe 2 more cool things, and then we'll call it. It's really hard to see this font on the front of this. So one thing we can do is we can actually layer divs. So I could say, for example, in our index.html, we have this banner div, and then we have the text. And I put this image on the banner div. Well, I can actually layer a div here. It's a cool thing that we can do to bring something to the foreground. And what I want to do is I'm going to give this div an ID of something like overlay. And as we go to our CSS, I'm going to target just the overlay. And we're going to give it a background color of white. Cool. We completely blocked off our image with an overlaid div of white. But what's cool here is RGBA. So RGB stands for red, blue, green, or red, green, blue, if you want to go in the right order. And it's on a scale of anywhere from 1 to 255 for red, green, and blue. So if you do 1, 1, 1, we'll get black. All the way up to white, which is at 255 for red, 255 for green, 255 for blue, and we should get white again. The A stands for transparency. So now I can say point, let's make this so you can see it. We can say like 0.4% transparent. And that background image is no longer as prominent. And maybe we'll say like maybe it's 6%. We want to make it a little bit less prominent. And we kind of fade out the background, which is pretty cool. So now we have this overlay where the image isn't dominating our field of view. We have a little like glossed overlay, and now this comes back to life here. And we can do maybe like color, and we'll say orange. And now we have our kind of welcome to fall picture. Again, a little bit tough to see. So we can also use something called adding borders to font, HTML, CSS. Font border. I'm drawing a blank on what it's called. It's who knows how we can add like a, oh, there it is. Shadow, adding shadow to text CSS. Again, back to W3 schools, love the place. Text shadow is the attribute, 2 pixels, and then some color. This is how we do hex colors. So let's take this and let's implement it in our code. We can add a text shadow, 2 pixels, and let's just do ours in the color of black. Cool. And you can see it kind of made it pop, added a little text shadow to this welcome to 2021. All right, very last thing. We're not getting to our content down here. We're ignoring it. That's all right. We've done some good stuff. Let's mess around with one last type of selector here. So we're selecting by ID. We're using 2 selectors to target just A tags inside of a nav bar. We've now selected our banner. We put an overlay div on top of that banner to make this pop a little bit. We did a bunch of stuff to center this text around, which is great. Another thing we can do is use something called pseudo selectors. So if we take our A tags and we do colon, there's a bunch of pseudo selectors, which basically say, style this element in this way when a user has interacted with it in some way. So before they've interacted with it, after they've interacted with it, or maybe when they are hovering over it. So this pseudo selector takes into account user interaction. It actually kind of edges into the JavaScript world. And we can say, cool, when somebody's hovering over this, maybe we will make the padding even bigger. We'll say like 15 pixels instead of the 10 that it's currently at. We can actually do the same thing. Nav, just for the A tags inside the nav bar. We can say maybe round out the edges. So border radius, we can round out these edges, 25 pixels. We can change the background color. We can do anything. To yellow, we'll flip these colors. We'll change this to yellow, and we will change the text color to orange red. Cool. This is not how you spell color. All right, so you run this, and now when I go and highlight something, you can see it actually interacts with how I am covering it. You can also add a transition time. So we'll say like transition, and we can give it like 1 second. So we can say, okay, take your time with this. Don't just rush into it. And we can kind of see it transform over a second, which is kind of cool. And we're adding in almost like animation a little bit, but at a very big kind of basic level. All right. There is one last thing I'm just going to point out, and we don't have to get into it, but you'll see this space that's happening between this nav bar and this header here. And I just want to point out a common kind of pitfall is every browser actually adds some default styling to our HTML. So we didn't actually create this margin here. The browser gave that margin to this header. So one thing you'll see is like, you'll see people sometimes include CSS resets. And it basically, I'm just going to copy one, but it takes all these elements and it just resets them to 0. So like body element, OL, UL, back quotes. And maybe this is a little bit too much at the moment, but sometimes you'll see these CSS resets included. Let's just put it way at the bottom. Let's do it right at the top here. And you'll see that space disappears. So that space was actually coming from predefined CSS that your browser is putting on like an H1, but now we see their H1 is much smaller too. So we might want to change that back to what it should be. But you'll see that space got taken away, which is nice. So some of these styles are coming from actually how the browser is interpreting your HTML. So you got to be careful with some of those things that are built into the browser. Right on. As a very quick recap, we're done, but and this will be sent out. You can mess around with it. I encourage you to use this code, tweak it, change it, have some fun. But ultimately, we talked about HTML tags and attributes of HTML tags. We talked about a few different types of HTML tags, open and closing tags versus self-closing tags. We talked about the way that they line up in the page, block level versus inline block. And then we got into how we can select HTML and add all sorts of custom modifications to make our page look more like the end result of Nike, hopefully, than the beginning of it. I deleted too much of our CSS. I'll bring it back. Thanks for hanging out for a little bit over an hour with me. Tiffany, I don't hear you. I see you talking, but. Yeah.
All right, I'm taking off the headphones. I just want to say thank you so much, Greg. You're an amazing instructor, and people in the comment section agree. If anyone has any questions, we can definitely get around to that right now. And yes, Babatunde, this has been recorded and will be emailed out to you all within 48 business hours. So look for it early next week. Also, if you don't see an email, definitely check out our YouTube channel. We post all events there as well. But if there's no questions, we can get going for this evening. Thank you so much, Greg. This was super awesome and very informative, and I had a great time, and I hope you all have a good rest of your evening and a great weekend ahead. Cheers.